Vidhammer Fantasy.
Welcome back to Vidhammer. I'm Spudlow, and in this video I'll be covering a third round matchup from the August Darkside tournament between me with my Artillery Empire list and another fellow Empire player. You can check out the first video in the series here, where I go over my army list and play against the Vampire Counts, and the second round against the Ogres is here. I was a little apprehensive in this match due to the stomping that I had in the second round, but I had a friendly opponent who showed me a few things about the Empire as well. Let's check it out. I'm back on the same board this time, and as luck would have it, I win the roll for board edge and take the right side again, but we have standard deployment zones this round. The scenario this time is a battle line variant where you score bonus points for each character that you kill. If a general is slain, then the next eligible character on that side becomes a general, and if there's no one left to take up the role, then that side automatically loses the battle. There are additional objective points as well for being within 6 inches of terrain pieces. I start off deployment on the right with my war machines. Since he doesn't have any scouts or ambushers, I put all my war machines up on the hill. This gives me the best field of fire with my artillery while being as far back as possible. He's got 2 units of handgunners with a Hochland long rifle in each one. He puts the first unit behind the lower house, and I go for my Luminarch above the war machines, since that's going to be the center of my battle line. He puts the other handgunners behind the tower, and now I start putting down my infantry blocks. Much like the last game, with the impassable terrain in the center, he's going to have 2 main avenues for his approach. I put my greatswords near the bottom end of my battle line to cover the lower entrance. I decided to use that unit since it was going to be out of range of the inspiring presence of my general, and that unit has the standard of discipline, so I don't mind. He puts down his block of 40 greatswords near the center of his battle line, which sets us up for a greatsword clash right in the middle. I put my halberdiers down next, and decide to put them as centrally located as possible. If I'm going to play a defensive game, then my spearmen will go towards the upper pass, the greatswords toward the lower, and the halberdiers can hold this position and move to reinforce whichever side needs help. He puts his halberdier block of 50 near the top, and I put my spearmen down 5 wide, pointed toward the upper pass. Now he does his war machines, a Hellblaster volley gun and a steam tank that both go on the bottom end of his line. This worries me a bit since I know how nasty Hellblasters can be on Toughness 3 armies, and that steam tank can put a lot of damage on a charge. The only unit I have left is the archers, and they're not going to do anything on that lower end, so I put them up top, figuring they might be able to match up with the handgunners in the tower if nothing else. He puts down his characters. A general of the Empire with meteoric iron armor for a 1+ save and a 6+ ward that carries the Mace of Hellstrom goes into his halberdiers, along with a wizard lord with a dispel scroll, and his captain BSB with the Griffin banner, which gives double your rank bonus in combat. I don't want to tangle with the general, but unfortunately he's got 3 characters in there, so that's a good chunk of points. He also has a warrior priest with the Talisman of Endurance in with his greatswords, which is a much more likely target. Finally, I put down my characters. The wizard lord is on the Luminarch, and I put the BSB with the halberdiers and the warrior priest with the greatswords as before. With the war machines nicely spaced on the hill, the engineer is able to sit right in the center and be 3 inches away from all the war machines, which is perfect. We roll for spells with his wizard lord getting Earthblood, Flesh to Stone, Throne of Vines, and Regrowth, while mine ends up with Light of Battle, Banishment, Net of Amantok, and Barona's Time Warp. He wins the starting roll and starts off generating 3 steam points for his tank. Then the handgunners move into the buildings and the halberdiers move up. He doesn't move the greatswords, which pretty much sets my strategy in stone. I can get a couple of rounds of artillery on his greatswords and whittle them down enough to match them up with the halberdiers. This leaves my greatswords able to go after the tank, and they should be able to take it out despite peppering from the Hellblaster and the handgunners. I'll sit back with the spearmen and wait for his halberdiers, then try to use the archers and Luminarch to capture terrain near the end of the game. I won't get any battle points this way, but I can put my biggest punch towards the bottom and hopefully get enough victory points for a win if my artillery doesn't all blow up. At least that's what I'm thinking at this point. The first magic phase ends up 10 versus 6. He starts off with 5 dice for Throne of Vines. This is pretty standard with the Lore of Life, but that doesn't mean I like it anymore. I decided to let this one go, since I would have to use all my dice to dispel it, but in retrospect, since I knew I was going to focus my shooting at the greatswords, I could have dispelled this one so I wouldn't have to worry about it on my turn, and just let him cast his buffs on the halberdiers that would wear off next turn anyways. As it is, he rolls 4 dice for Flesh to Stone on the halberdiers, and I only use 4 dice to dispel since I'm more concerned with the ward save his warrior priest can put on the greatswords, so I hold back 2 dice against his last. I didn't roll high enough to dispel it, and with his last die he goes for the regeneration on the halberdiers, but I dispel it. In shooting, the steam tank fires its cannon at my greatswords and kills 1. His great cannon shoots for the spearmen for 3. On my turn, I try for a swift reform of the greatswords, but I fail, so I just face them towards the center and I give the halberdiers and spearmen a step up. I just want to get them to point in the right directions, and I reformed the greatsword so I could move them without getting in range of the Hellblaster. Magic is 10 versus 5, and I start off my run of bastardization by casting Net of Amentok on his halberdiers. I didn't roll a very high casting value, so he rolled 2 dice to go for a dispel, but came up just short. I try to weaken his greatswords by using my next 4 dice for banishment, but he uses his dispel scroll on it, and my final attempt at the Luminarch's Bolt of Illumination gets dispelled with his remaining dice. On to shooting, I fire both my rocket batteries at the greatswords, and even though I get some direct hits, with the 4+ ward save from the greatswords, I only get 5 wounds. The great cannon is able to take out 3, and my Hellblasters and archers remain out of range. On the second turn, he generates 6 steam points with his tank, and uses them all for a charge at the greatswords, but the range comes up short. With the net on the halberdiers, none of the other units move. Before rolling for Winds of Magic, he goes for a strength test for the Wizard Lord to be able to cast, but he fails the test and takes 3 wounds that were already off the table. He doesn't worry with his other caster and heads into the shooting phase. The upper handgunners shoot for the spearmen for a single wound, and the lower ones hit the greatswords for 1 as well. The long rifle gets a sniper shot on my warrior priest, but it fails to wound, though a little scary. The great cannon aims for the greatswords, but misfires and explodes. Back over to my turn, I'd have charged the steam tank, but my greatswords are pointed in the wrong direction. I turn them towards the tank to help the Hellblasters with line of sight, as the other units take some baby steps. Magic ends up 9 versus 6. I use my first 4 dice for Net of Amentok on the halberdiers again, and he lets it go through. Then I use 3 dice for banishment on the steam tank, but I fail the casting cost. With my wizard out, I use my last 2 dice for the Luminarch's missile, but it gets dispelled. Just a little. In shooting, both of the Hellblasters shoot for the steam tank and are only able to get a single wound, but luckily the cannon hits for 6. The rocket batteries shoot for his greatswords again, and this time they're able to get 12 unsaved wounds. Finally, I have the archers shoot for the halberdiers, but they fail to wound. On the third turn, the steam tank risks it all for a charge on the greatswords and gets a dangerous overpressure. This made me quite nervous since he could have hit me with 6 steam points of energy, but he only had 3 wounds left and exploded instead. With the net out again, we go into the magic phase where it's 3 versus 3, and he fails the net test again, but at least I remember to dispel the Throne of Vines this time around. For shooting, The handgunners miss the archers, but take out 2 greatswords, and his Hellblaster ends up just within range of the greatswords and take out 4 as well. Over to my turn. I move the greatswords up since they're in range already, and I can hopefully get a charge off next round on the house. I get a swift reform with the halberdiers to move them forward, and I move the archers up as well. Magic ends up 9 versus 5, and this time I only use 3 dice for Net of Amantok, which he is set to dispel, but to his dismay I get triple 6s. The wizard takes a wound in the backlash, and I lose the rest of my dice, but the net is out once again. In shooting, my great cannon shoots for the halberdiers and kills a single model, then the rocket batteries join in for 15 more. The Hellblasters shoot for the handgunners in the lower building, and end up getting 5 wounds from the first, and the second misfires and can't shoot for 2 turns. Finally, the archers shoot for the halberdiers, but fail to wound again. The 4th turn starts out with the halberdiers trying to move, but they fail the strength test and take 4 wounds. The greatswords step up in their absence, and we move into the magic phase where it's 4 against 4. He uses all 4 dice to go for the ward save on the greatswords, but I'm able to get the dispel by 1. In shooting, his Hellblaster takes out 4 more greatswords, the lower handgunners get 1 more, and the upper handgunners get 5 spearmen. For my turn, I charge his greatswords with both my greatswords and my halberdiers. I first thought of charging the house with the greatswords, but the Hellblasters are likely to finish off the handgunners, so better to put everything into the important fight. I also move the archers into the building, and move up the spearmen and luminarch to cover the terrain elements for the endgame. Magic is 10 versus 6, and now is a fine time for me to realize that my best combat buffs have a range of 12 inches, which is just out of range of my greatswords. I use 4 dice for Net of Bastardness, but he uses all 6 of his dice to happily dispel it. With no more dispel dice for him, I use 2 dice to put the Warrior Priest's buff on the greatswords for the 5+ regen save, which I forget about. Then 2 dice for banishment on the halberdiers for 4 wounds, and the last 2 dice for the Luminarch's lightning bolt for 2 more. In shooting, the single Hellblaster hits the lower handgunners for 4 wounds, and all that's left is the guy with the long rifle, and he passes his panic check. The rocket batteries aim for the halberdiers, with both firing 3 barrages for 14 wounds. Finally, the archers shoot for what's left and get 1 more. In the first combat of the game, both of my units are able to pass their fear checks, and both of our greatswords have hatred from our warrior priests. Our characters all fire into the rank and file models, with my warrior priest and BSB both doing 2 wounds, and his taking out 1 greatsword. My halberdiers are only able to score a single wound before our greatswords exchange blows. I lose 3 greatswords, but then we remember to use his hatred, but no more wounds are caused. Then he hits the halberdiers and gets 3 more. My greatswords hit for 4, and I end up winning the combat, but he's stubborn and passes his break test. On the 5th turn, his halberdiers go for a charge on the spearmen, but they fail the range and move 4 inches. But he still rejoices in that he gets a full magic phase this turn, with Winds of Magic coming up 7 versus 6. He uses 3 dice for Throne of Vines, which I let go, hoping to dispel the rest. He uses his remaining 4 for regeneration, but I use all 6 of my dice to dispel it. In shooting, both of the handgunner units shoot for my general on the Luminarch with their long rifles, but neither manages to wound. Back into combat, his warrior priest issues a challenge, and I accept with my BSB, thinking he might stand a chance since he did 2 wounds last round, and he does end up causing a single wound, but he takes 1 as well. For regular combat, my halberdiers and greatswords get 5 wounds, and I lose 3 greatswords in return, win the combat, but he passes his stubborn break test once again. For my 5th turn, I move up the Luminarch and Spearmen. Magic ends up 8 to 5. I use 4 dice for the net again on the halberdiers, and he uses all his dice to dispel it again. I've got 4 uncontested dice, so I use 2 for banishment, but the spell fails, then 2 for the Luminarch's bolt to take out the halberdier's musician. In shooting, the archers take out the last halberdier, so there are only the 3 characters left. The Hellblasters finish off the last handgunner in the lower house, and I decide to shoot the rocket batteries at the 3 characters, rather than the upper handgunners in the tower. They get a few hits, but only manage to put a single wound on the BSB and the Wizard Lord. In combat, his warrior priest saves a wound in our challenge, but fails to wound in return. For the remaining models, I lose 2 greatswords and finish off the rest of his, taking my halberdiers out of combat. For the final turn, he charges the spearman with his character unit. Magic ends up 4 versus 5 after channels, and he uses all 4 dice for flesh to stone, which I dispel. In shooting, his handgunners are all in range of the Luminarch and are able to kill off the general. In the lower combat, the BSB manages to kill off the warrior priest, and in the upper combat, his characters do a single wound to the spearman, but they don't take any in return. The general gives them the hold the line ability, so he rolls 3 dice for his break test and passes. On to my turn. I move the Luminarch and archers, so they're in range of as much terrain as I can get. We roll for magic dice and channel, and I just end the magic phase since my wizard is dead and my priest is out of combat. I bypass shooting as well, and in combat I lose some spearmen, but I'm able to take out his wizard lord as we end the game. I end up with the victory and actually secured enough points and terrain pieces to put me in a 2-way tie for 3rd at the end of the tournament. So that's how the Empire did for me. All in all, I'd say I enjoyed playing this list. It does have its shortcomings when it comes to the high-toughness, large-base armies, such as Ogres, Demons of Chaos, or Warriors of Chaos, but it makes up for it when those artillery batteries hit for all they're worth. The archers didn't do much in the way of damage, but their maneuverability helped me capture a few more objectives. The Luminarch would have been much more cost-effective if I'd remembered to keep it close enough to my melee blocks to actually give them the 6+ ward save. Thanks for watching this battle report. Be sure and check back for more videos each week. Do us a favor and subscribe, like the video if you want to see more, and as always, send us a comment if you have any tactics or matchups you'd like to see. Till next time from the Vidhammer crew, keep fighting.